The first talk we had planned for today is very much focusing on the system thinking. And as you know, we talked about it yesterday as well, the first policy brief of the think tank is on this system innovation and topic. And given the fact that it's so incredibly crucial to the thinking of Food 2030, we wanted to give it a bit of a more solid base and discuss a bit more about it this morning. And especially give a bit of the science behind it. So the studies that have led to this food systems approach and RI thinking. Now, of course, we always need to start with the problem, because basically we are doing this whole systems approach because we are facing problems that are of a nature that that we have not faced before to this extent, and the complexity of the problems. We see that issues of malnutrition, environmental pollution, biodiversity loss, antibiotics, pesticide use, so the whole disease area, the disease pressure, but all the greenhouse gases, land use conflicts, water scarcity, animal welfare, and they are all interlinked. It's not just that each and every one of these problems can be dealt with in isolation. We increasingly see that they are having the complexity that makes us in need of new approaches to solving these problems. And why are we feel that it's so relevant to do something about it? What is the urgency? Is basically because there are lots of values that are underneath that are actually driving our food system, what we all share, but we feel is important. Issues like sustainability, affordability, accessibility, diversity are jeopardized by these problems. So the function of the system cannot have its functionality in the way we would like it to have. So therefore there is urgency to change. Now, we are doing already for a long time research and innovation to help solve problems in our food system. So this is the issue of turning to research and innovation is nothing new. We are doing that already for a long time. And although there are examples that contribute to some of the problems that I listed before, like some of the malnutrition or the agricultural production. Of course, the last 20 years we have seen food that hasn't been as cheap as it has ever been before. At the same time, we see that the intensity of production gives us trade-offs in other values. So that we see that in many cases, if we have problems that seem to be solved well, they seem to be causing problems in other areas. So increasingly, we are confronted with also these unforeseen side effects in other areas of the food system. Also, we have problems with slow adoption of some of the impeccable solutions that we have found, especially in the environmental area. We sometimes see that when we think that we have a solution that will really reduce pollution or other environmental pressure, we have very much problems of slow adoption, often blamed on consumers or regulations or all kinds of things. And definitely we see problems in scaling up innovations. So really anchoring them in the system. So, what is going on? So why are we not, what's the problem with the RNI nowadays that we can't seem to be having these effects that we do want to have? And for that it's relevant to turn to Roger's model of diffusion. It's already a model from the 70s, 80s, but it still has its explanatory value. What he did, he was looking at how innovations diffuse, the factors that influence the speed of diffusion of innovations. And based on that, he found that some of these curves are more to the left than others. So what makes it that they go quickly or slowly? And these factors have been, and they still hold. So it's in that sense a very strong model. what I want to show is actually going to the last one, because it's about relative advantage. Is it better than the other one? Can we try it out? Can we see the improvement? And is it rather simple to use? Do we not need so many new investments? However, this last one is the compatibility. And the compatibility has to do with, does it match our current values, current culture? Does it match our current structures, behavior patterns, etc.? So otherwise, does it fit the way we have organized things now, the way we think about things and do things? And with some of these problems, with most of these problems, actually, we want this to change. We want behavioral change. We want to change structures. We want to change the things. We want to change attitudes. So basically, many of the interventions that are needed to solve our problems are incompatible with our current way of doing things. So actually, that means that they will, by definition, not go smoothly. Yeah, they won't. And how can we? Why does it happen like this? And that basically has to do with our traditional approach to research and innovation. That actually still most of our students are being taught in this fashion. And the traditional linear approach is that we can solve problems by breaking them into small parts. And that then we move from one end to the other. So we take the problem, we break it up in small parts, we do our research and innovation, and then we bring it to the next part. Yeah, so build up, and then we go implement policy, etc. What is very clear is that we usually have a divide between the science and the society and policy. So we have two divides. We divide problems, yeah, we compartmentalize them in science, and we have this divide. And both of these lead to an implementation gap. In the sense that we see here, often it's called the death valley. Yeah. So it is very recognizable also in research and innovation for more economic purposes. It's in all areas of innovation that we see this. So, what then? This is what we often call our food system. The interesting thing is, and the novelty here, because actually when we talk about a food system, we are already doing something new. Because in many cases we're talking about the agricultural system, the retail, the processing, we're talking about the health system, we're talking about the environmental system of waste management system. So what we see is that the food system is already a collection of different subsystems that have already been strongly institutionalized. Jochen will talk about it later and say, like, here we have a very strong agri-food lobby, the agri-lobby, that often doesn't have anything to do with the health system. So what we are already doing here, if we are considering food as a whole cycle, that we really take all the different parts and integrate them. Really looking at them, not only looking at health, without looking at where is the food produced and how do we get it to the consumers. Not only producing food as cheaply as possible without thinking about those eating the food. So, what everybody says is, if they look at this picture, hey, wait a minute, this is a gross oversimplification. Yeah, it still has this linear thought in it. And they are very right. A better picture is this one. Now, immediately when you go back to this one, you already see our tendency to trying to make sense of complexity by breaking it up in smaller parts. So immediately we do it already with this one, because this, wait a minute, how are we ever going to do this? Yeah. So another way of breaking apart, which I think is more relevant, is looking at it like this. We have multifunctionality of our food system. We have multi-factors in our food system, multi-levels and multi-actors. And that we need to take as a whole. Looking at it as a complex dynamics, which results in trade-offs and synergies which we hardly can understand. we should realize that really this we don't understand. Now we can try to increase our understanding of the complexity, but we cannot truly understand it. It's too complex. So, our current RNI intervention strategies are not really catered of dealing with that complexity. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to really realize that we need to change our thinking as researchers, as scientists. We need to change our thinking from a traditional way to a systems thinking. So if we're talking about systems thinking, that is basically what we're talking about. So that's the school of thought that focuses on recognizing these interconnections between the parts of a system and truly synthesizing them in a unified view of the whole, as much as possible. So that also means that when we tried to develop interventions, need to try to understand the system in which that intervention needs to function. That is, taking much more of a broader look at the world around us in all its complexity. And understanding the system will help us anticipate the synergies and the trade-offs, so that if we are going to try to change something here, that we know that something there will also happen as much as possible. It also means that we cannot, in our research approach, if we cannot completely anticipate, shouldn't set things in stone. That means that we need to make things emergent. And in science, we often have these strict protocols in which we don't want to change things along the way. So it also means that our research and innovation in other ways changes. And another important one is that you cannot do it alone, because we only have partial insight into this whole system. So by having more people involved from different parts of the system, we can better understand what is going on. So that actually means that when we look at it as a set of problems, and not break them apart, continuously look at the whole, that we cannot do anything else but science and practice to join hands. So make sure that there is no divide here. And it means that bringing the stakeholders already at the beginning of the process into the research and innovation. Therefore, the responsible research and innovation is such an interesting approach to link up with the system thinking. That's why in many cases we say systems and RRI approach to research and innovation. And here we have all the different stakeholders that need to be involved in the research process if we want to do a systems approach. That we need to be diverse and inclusive with these different stakeholders. Here is the very open importance of anticipation and reflection, because basically we need to do it to think forward in this complexity. We need to be very open and transparent, because otherwise we cannot interact well and get all the knowledge in. And then as a researcher, you need to be responsive and adaptive continuously along the way. That means that reflection and responsiveness, learning are key in this. Okay, that's nice. How are we doing at the moment with the research and innovation system? What I've already said, well, we have this traditional linear thinking, and if you look at the research and innovation system as a system, because just like with the food system, we can look at the research and innovation as a system, then we can see in that system various barriers. We have the fact that we are so nicely breaking up our science into disciplines. Very nice, helpful. We started doing that very strongly during the 20th century. We should stop doing that now. It's good, it's important, but now it's much more important to go to the multi and interdisciplines, because we need to learn from one another if we want to understand these and solve these more complex problems. There's extremely low involvement of stakeholders. There is some interaction with, of course, with industry, basically also because they pay often the bills of researchers. But if you look at the involvement of consumers, CSOs in research and innovation, it is very low. If you look at academia, if you look at the food system and the amount of money that is spent from private sources into that research, it is pretty low. And the sources that do fund a lot of the academic research, for example, from the national research calls, in many countries they're open. So it's a bottom-up process where researchers are mainly judged on excellence. And excellence does not include relevance, in the sense that it needs to be linked up with citizens and really based on needs. Overall, there is little support for this type of research in the R&I system, and the level of knowledge and awareness is relatively low as well. So, in other cases, the RI is far from business as usual. System thinking is far from business as usual. So, we need a double system change. We often say we need to change our food system because it's not fulfilling the values and having lots of persistent problems. We also, if we want R&I to contribute to that improvement of the food system, it needs to change itself. So we are having this double. Now, then we know how difficult it is to change systems. Luckily, we have a school of thought that is giving us more pointers on how to go about system change. And that's the system innovation and transition theory part. And there are different schools in that as well. I'm going to give you one version. So I'm not going into all the details and the fights that we have as scientists about how concepts need to be filled in and how they need to be operationalized best. I just give one of the stories. But basically it's about this. It has started in the 90s when we were confronted with quite a lot of system failures, let's say. And it provides guidelines to analyze the systems as well as pointers for action. It was basically developed first in the mobility and energy sector, but now has found its way into the food sector and the health sector. And one of its visions, because it's very vision-based, is about sustainable development. So it became all about is because many of our systems we have problems in realizing the change to this sustainability. So it's actually the sustainability thought that has driven this field. Now, what are central concepts? It's the persistent problem itself. I won't go into that further. I already gave a bit out. It's a problem that is durable. It has been with us for quite a long time. It is therefore, everybody agrees it's difficult to solve. And the third aspect is crucial. It is linked to the system itself. Yeah, so there is something in the culture, structure, and practice of the system that is at the root of the problem. So it has a systemic nature, call it. The transition itself, the change in the system, the multi-level perspective is crucial, and the idea of transition phases. And last is the prescriptive one, so the idea of that we can change the system through transition management. Now, this is what I said before. We see a system as a structure, a culture, and a practice. So the structure and the culture are the structuring elements of a system. It's in interaction with the actors. So actors actually, it's the actors that make the system. Huh? It's us all that are part of the system which make that we have this culture, this shared culture and this shared structure. And together, by going back and forth between that, we shape our practices, the doing. So that is basically the idea of what a system is. And the dominant culture, structure and practice we call a regime or a constellation. Just depends on your school. And it also means that actors shape culture and structure, but on the other hand, culture and structure also shape the actors. The successful actors know best to use the culture and the structure to their own advantage. So if you're good at that, you're a top dog in the system. Yeah, so the ones that lose out don't know how to use that, the culture and the structure to their advantage. That also shows that it will cause resilience and stability in the system, because the actors that are standing out most are likely to want to keep this culture and structure as it is, because they stand to benefit from it. But culture and structure also give us efficiency, peace of mind. You don't have to think about everything all the time. It helps you develop routines. And that's the other part, the less directed part, like power balances. It's something that you want to consciously uphold. This is the routines, is something unconscious. Yeah, so this is what makes the stability in the system from the unconscious aspect. We don't like to change because routines give us peace of mind and extra time. So each system has a regime, a dominant culture and structure and practice that is shared by most, but it's not stable. Although I say it has resilience and it likes to stay like it is, it doesn't, because there are things going on. Things going on in what we call the landscape, that are the larger trends, the eco-trends that take place, changes in like emancipation, but also economic changes that take place, changes in our environment, that put pressure on this regime to change. The niche level is the level of experimentation. That is where actors within the regime players or outside actors experiment with new ways of working. Yeah. And this is an interaction. And this interaction makes that things at this level change. And change can happen like we saw with Rogers' diffusion model. Actually, change in systems work the same as the diffusion of innovations. And there are always drivers that accelerate the transition and barriers that hinder transition. Now, what is interesting is then how can we, because what we want to do with food systems is change this. Yeah, actually, we want to make changes in culture, structure, and practice. Now, in many cases, we see that at the landscape level there may be pressure. We see, for example, the importance that we attach to a value like sustainability is for a strong part driving the change at the regime level. But it can best work also through the niche level, because there we try to find out how we can do things. And given the fact that systems are so complex, if you only push there from the top, instead of also working through smaller experiments, we have not the capacity to learn that easily. Yeah, here we are really top-down, struck by lightning, let's say. What we often do, and this is where research is often about, the deepening, the proof of principle. But here, what it is said in transition management is actually that this deepening needs to take place in direct understanding of the regime level and the landscape level. Then we have the thing at this level of broadening. So how can we duplicate and link initiatives? Often we are talking about a portfolio of experiments, not just one experiment, but we already link different initiatives. And only then we need to think about how do we then go about from here and this level. And this is, of course, the embedding in the regime. How do we link it to structures that are there? So how can we also use those as drivers? And how can we use policy development to put pressure? So this is more or less the squeeze for the change in a learning, an open and reflexive environment. And so that means that we have here a systems approach to system innovation, right? In the project we do exactly that. So work package 2, 3 and 4 are actually having the building blocks for understanding the food system and the food system change. What we're doing with work package 2 is looking at these trends. What's the landscape that we are moving in. We also look at showcases, like what are these niche experiments in R&I that could really help to change the system? What can we learn from them? A potential breakthrough, and that distinguishes it from just a showcase. A breakthrough actually does change the regime. So in work package 2, 3 and 4 we are doing that here, looking at the showcases and looking at the breakthroughs to learn from that. Because of course retrospectively we can learn a lot to anticipate. So that means that they together help us understand better the transitional dynamics that we can use. The first policy brief, this is my last slide. The first policy brief exactly tries to pinpoint these types of things. And several recommendations have come out of this. First of all, very much about this interaction between research, society and policy. About engagement of the wide variety of stakeholders and this paradigm shift towards a more transdisciplinary research, not only multi and inter, but also going beyond together with these stakeholders making the science. Looking at both public, the independent R&I, as looking at these entrepreneurial opportunities in research and innovation. Last but not least, we need very much also investment in the social sciences. What we see is that there is a very strong focus on the technical part. As the high-tech, the nice and sexy thing, we see that in science there is a tendency to focus on that. And especially in these kinds of processes, we do need the social sciences and social science innovation very much. And the last one was about really truly deepening our understanding of the food system and its dynamics and its true capacity for development. Okay. Thank you very much.